This chapter of Matthew, the first in the gospel, begins with a genealogy, listing the ancestors of Joseph back all the way to Abraham. Aren't you glad we didn't read that today? From Abraham through his great-grandson Judah, through Boaz, the husband of Ruth, through David with Bathsheba and Josiah, the great king, all the way down past the end of the Old Testament, straight through to Joseph himself, whom Matthew calls the husband of Mary. As a child, I could not for the life of me figure out why we had to slog through that long list of begats to get to the nativity. Even if I was a little unclear on the birds and the bees and genetics and Punnett squares, I had to question why we were even talking about Joseph's ancestry. He is, as American daytime talk show hosts would say, not the father. The best explanation I got for this from kind Sunday school teachers and pastors to whom I was likely a nightmare with all of my questions was this: Joseph is not the biological father, no, but he became Jesus's father. Joseph is a righteous man who stepped up, who took on the child that was not his own, but fathered him generously and graciously as if he were his own. We read Joseph's ancestry because he grafted Jesus onto his family tree, much as God grafts us onto the divine family tree. But I think today's reading shows us the moment that Joseph almost failed to live up to this kind legacy. It shows the moment that Joseph waffled, questioned, feared, almost cracked under the pressure. Verse 19, as I translate it, says, "Now the man with Mary, Joseph, was righteous, and therefore he was not inclined to expose her to public disgrace, and he intended to send her away secretly." Now, I translate this, "the man with Mary," and not Mary's husband, to be a little more faithful to the original Greek. Some of you may know that there is no specific word in either Hebrew or Greek for husband. There's only the word man. Ish in Hebrew, aner in Greek. To be a woman's man was a legal category. In the ancient world, women had to be connected directly to a man, to an ish or an aner, in order to be safe and in order to keep her in line. Typically, this man was her father, or in the absence of such, perhaps an uncle or an older brother. Then, quickly thereafter, it became her husband, who was her man. These men were legally and socially responsible for the women of whom they were legal guardians. They ensured and provided for a woman's physical safety, very importantly, of course, for her virginity, and they safeguarded her from shame by properly ordering the household in which she lived. It's curious then that Mary is under Joseph's guardianship, even though they're not yet married. And we have no background of Mary's father or brothers or uncles, any men who might have been her guardian before Joseph. One wonders, had her father kicked her out? How long has Joseph been her guardian? Are they overdue to wed? Perhaps, perhaps Joseph has been lollygagging on calling the rabbi and booking the synagogue. Where's an ancient wedding planner when you need one? But the good news, here lowercase g, lowercase n, is that Joseph is a righteous man. Specifically, Matthew says, proof of his righteousness is that he is not inclined to expose his fiancée, who is pregnant by unknown and therefore unseemly means, to public disgrace. What do we think of when we hear the words public disgrace? We might think about being whispered about in the grocery store, We might think about the woman who has to draw water from the well at strange hours. We might think of being forced to sit at the back of the church, not being invited to the family wedding, being marked off the Christmas card list. Living in Williamsburg, I have to mention the stocks outside the old courthouse. Public disgrace. For a man in the ancient Mediterranean world, to be publicly disgraced meant he might be chastised by the town elders who sit at the gates. He might lose not only respect, but business connections, job opportunities. This is a real loss of potentially of income. Because who can trust a man who can't even properly order his household to run your donkey farm or your olive tree farm? But for a woman to be publicly disgraced was to become deeply unsafe and endangered. A woman who has been sent away in dishonor loses all marriage prospects, loses the guardianship of a man, and therefore loses most of her ability to function in society. She also loses physical safety. Without housing, without social support, without a door to lock at night, and with the reputation of wantonness, the dangers were immense. Not to mention, who would hire a woman? Who would make a contract with her with no man to guarantee it? A shamed woman outside of the legal custody of a man is in grave and imminent danger, not just of gossip, but of all of the horrors you are thinking of. So Matthew says that Joseph is a righteous man because he is not inclined to let this happen. But I have to ask, is that the full measure of righteousness? It seems a quite low bar. It seems not as much as the bush that refused to burn asked of Moses. Not as much as Joseph's ancestor Josiah commanded in Deuteronomy. Not all that God tells us constitutes righteousness. But maybe being righteous means sometimes choosing between two evils, the lesser of the two. And I suppose Joseph is righteous. He follows the law, and he does not want his own reputation damaged by the bad behavior of the woman he is not yet married to. So he makes a righteous plan. He will send Mary away quietly and in secret. It's the proper thing to do. It's what the Dowager Countess on Downton Abbey would approve of. Perhaps he is thinking of his ancestor Abraham and how he sent Hagar and the infant Ishmael into the wilderness. He, like Abraham, will not let this inconvenient woman and her inconvenient child ruin his one precious, righteous life. Thanks be to whoever put this here. When the angel comes to Joseph in a dream, I like to imagine that Joseph was having a fitful sleep. I hope that he was tossing and turning, his stomach churning over the righteousness he was planning. To send a young woman, a child herself really, away to save her from public humiliation, sure, but also to ensure that her disgrace did not spoil his own life. His plan to remove himself from her, to abdicate the guardianship that he was promised to, and let her become someone else's problem. Now this angel is kinder to Joseph than I would have been. If I were rewriting this story, creatively writing a midrash of it, I think I'd be tempted to have that angel drag Joseph out of bed by the ear. I want a white-hot angelic finger wagging in his face. I want Joseph quivering like the prophet Isaiah in the throne room of God, crying out, "Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unrighteous plans." Because the truth is, my friends, if an angel comes to you and says, "Do the opposite of what you were planning," your plan wasn't that righteous. I want Joseph realizing in fear and trembling that his version of righteousness is a joke when you consider the suffering that he is willing to leave Mary and her child to. I want him realizing that saving someone from shame, but leaving them to, let's call it what it is, become impoverished and potentially die, is a poor salvation indeed. And I have to wonder, would we still have the story of Jesus if Joseph's righteous plan had come to pass? Without Joseph to take them there to be registered, Jesus would not have been born in Bethlehem in accordance with the prophecy. Without Joseph's income, how could Mary have ever made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem with her young son? Without a father, would Jesus have learned carpentry? But more importantly, without a father, would Jesus and his mother have even survived? Without a father, our Savior might have grown up homeless, might have seen his mother assaulted, might himself have been trafficked into slavery. The light of the world might have perished in infancy, his starving and dehydrated mother's milk drying up in her breasts, and all the local townsfolk unwilling to help, unwilling to be tainted by her disgrace, unwilling to give up their own righteousness. The angel says to Joseph, "Do not be afraid." And this is a kind of grace. Unlike the disgrace Joseph was ready to leave Mary and her child to perish within, God sends a message of true grace and true righteousness. Do not be afraid, God says, to do what you know is right, though you know it may cause you all measure of trouble. Do not be afraid to speak the hard truth, though you could be laughed at or fired or humiliated for it. Do not be afraid, my friends, to change your mind, to admit that you have been wrong, that what you thought was righteousness, what you thought was right, was in fact a half-truth, a half-salvation, a cause of great suffering to women and children and people of color. Do not be afraid, the angel says, to do that which is mortifying and unfathomable and humiliating, because through it, God is working. Do not be afraid to heap grace upon those who are disgraced, because through it, God is sending grace into the world. The kind of grace that is loud and shrieking with the decibels only a newborn can hit. Do not be afraid to choose the uphill path, the one your mama prayed you'd never have to walk, the path that seems dark and full of terrors, the one that will find you accompanying disgraced people through the valley of the shadow of death, for it is there that God announces, "I am Emmanuel, God with you." And perhaps this is why Matthew begins his gospel with Joseph's genealogy, because of how many unlikely, disgraced people populate it. Judah, who fathered children by his daughter-in-law Tamar. Boaz, who overcame possibly catastrophic social fallout in marrying Ruth. And David, whose son Solomon was conceived through his wicked treatment of Bathsheba and her husband. Perhaps Matthew includes this genealogy to remind readers, maybe even to remind Joseph himself, that he only exists because people who had been disgraced received God's grace. And so Joseph awoke from sleep and did as the angel commanded him. And in my midrashic rewriting, I would add that, like Isaiah, maybe he felt like his lips had been burned by the purifying fire of God's presence, so that he could no longer call his half-hearted efforts at saving himself by sending away a woman and her child to suffering and possible death righteous. No, he would rise now a new man with a truer righteousness, one that pours grace on that which is disgraced. A righteousness that takes in those whom others would cast out or deport or intern. A righteousness that demands justice instead of quiet cover-ups. I want to close by quoting a beloved Christmas novella, Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. It's perhaps the most beautiful book I've read this year, and if you're looking to add to your list of books you've read this year, it's also very short. It follows the story of a coal merchant during those desperately poor and hungry lean years in Ireland. He sees injustice and mistreatment of others all around him, and he yearns to do what's right, but there's always another bill, and there are his daughters' mouths to feed and futures to think of, and the windows need fixing, and. At the end of the novella, he takes in a young woman who has been abused in the local church's home for unwed mothers, where they work her to the bone and leave her outside to sleep in the coal shed at night. Our main character takes her in against his wife's wishes, against his own reason, because he knows in his heart it's the right thing to do, the righteous thing to do, the Christian thing to do, the thing he'd want someone to do for his own daughters, God forbid. The book ends this way. How light and tall he almost felt, walking along with this girl at his side, and some fresh, new, unrecognizable joy in his heart. Was it possible that the best of him was shining forth and surfacing? The fact was that he would pay for this decision, but never once in his whole and unremarkable life had he known a happiness akin to this. The worst was yet to come, he knew. Already he could feel a world of trouble waiting for him behind the next door. But the worst that could have happened was also already behind him. The thing not done, which could have been, which he would have had to live with for the rest of his life. Whatever suffering he was now to meet was a long way from what the girl at his side had already endured and might yet surpass. Climbing the street toward his own front door with the barefooted girl, his fear more than outweighed every other feeling, but in his foolish heart, he not only hoped, but legitimately believed that they would manage. Joseph arose from that dream, a resurrected man, before Jesus even made resurrection cool. He turned his back on the easy path, and though he knew it would be difficult, that it could even ruin him, he would do what was right, what was truly righteous, what God commanded of him. The worst was yet to come, he knew. But the worst that could have happened, abandoning the Son of God and his holy mother, jeopardizing the salvation of the world, was already behind him. the thing not done, which could have been, which he would have had to live with for the rest of his life. Whatever suffering he was to meet was a long way from what the girl at his side had already endured and what she and her son would have endured if he had not overcome his fear and become the man they needed him to be. And with God's help, Joseph may even have not only hoped but legitimately believed that he and Mary would manage, that they would bring this holy child into this bleak midwinter, and that through him, grace would overcome all disgrace. Amen.